I'm Professor Emily Zobel Marshall, and I'm a professor of postcolonial literature at Leeds Beckett University. I worked there for a very long time now. My main areas of specialism are Black British, African, and Caribbean writing. And I'm of Caribbean heritage myself, and I think that's why I've wanted to pursue a career in postcolonial writing. I really like focusing on folklore in particular and looking at folklore that was rooted in Africa and was brought over to the Caribbean with enslaved people. And I look at how folklore is used as a form of survival and resistance. So, what really interests me is how cultural forms can be used as a form of resistance. I'm also the co-chair of the David Oluwale Memorial Association. So we are a charity committed to anti-racism and raising awareness around homelessness and ill mental health. And I also write poetry, and my poetry is very much celebration of women, of my matrilineal line, and also of the natural world. Things that are unchanging in terms of mental health and race in this country are that we have a sort of clear continuation to what happened to David Oluwale, who was a Nigerian migrant who came to Leeds and was traumatized and harassed by two police officers until his death in 1969, but also spent a period of over 8 years in Menston Asylum, where he had really brutal psychiatric treatment, which led to a breakdown of his mental health. And he was persecuted both in and outside psychiatric institutions because of his race. So now, we're 2024, 2023, a government report shows us that Black people are 3 times more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So things are not changing, and we're not looking at how institutional racism is contributing towards a really high number of Black and Asian people suffering from ill mental health. So, those figures show us that there's been a lack of real progress. And I think that it's really important to be doing projects like you're doing, Joy, which seek to try and understand better, to focus on lived experience, and also try and bring about policy change so that we can really look at the sort of, the root and branch issue that's happening here in our mental health institutions and our mental health support. So for me, cultural resistance is a sort of obsession of mine, because in my research I've looked at how the trickster figure, which was at the centre of folklore carried from West Africa to the Caribbean by enslaved people, how telling the story of the trickster figure, which is always a small creature like a Nancy or Brer Rabbit, who turns the table on powerful creatures using their brains rather than their brawn. So how these stories, these folk tales that were told throughout the period of plantation life, were actually strategies for survival and resistance. And it not only helped enslaved people at a psychological level to resist always their enslavement. There, no such thing as a compliant slave, but also they formed a type of mental training for enslaved people. So actually the tactics that were used in the stories by these creatures were the same tactics that were used on the plantations. So whether that was rubbing salt into old wounds, working slowly, lying, so using your linguistic dexterity, your way with words to get the better of plantation masters, which then could sometimes break out into outright rebellion and revolt, burning the cane fields, killing whites, escaping from the plantation. So I show I've written 2 books about this, Nancy's Journey, An American Trickster, and I show how these encapsulated in this folklore are actually ways of surviving in the here and now, in practical terms. So I think that culture carries that weight. The culture can actually help us resist at a psychological and practical level. So people can often think, well, what stories? It's a story or a poem or a piece of music or a piece of art. How can actually have, an impact in our everyday lives? But actually, it's cultural forms that do that, and especially Black cultural forms. And we see that across the African diaspora. I think poetry is pivotal in processing trauma, in a sense that poetry can be incredibly cathartic. So, through writing, the writer is able to put on the page the memories, the trauma of lived experience. So there's all of that sort of cathartic element to writing, but also poetry allows people to walk in the shoes of others. And there isn't really a cultural form like reading that allows you to walk in the shoes of others. So a writer once said that a person who reads lives 1,000 lives, and a person who doesn't read lives only one. So that reading, poetry, prose enables people to have that kind of deep sense of connection, of empathy with feelings and experiences that they might not have had before. And I think that if we are going to tackle inequalities, it's so important for people to put themselves in the place of others, to have that sense of empathy and connection and understanding and shared humanity. And that's the beauty of writing for me. So I think it's a big question. And what I feel that we have lived through recently in terms of the pandemic, and also the height of the Black Lives Matter movement after the killing of George Floyd in 2020, I think we've lived through these massive paradigm shifts globally. And so the pandemic in many ways helped us to understand globally our sense of shared humanity, our vulnerability, our fragility as a people. That may be a rather optimistic way of interpreting what was obviously an incredibly traumatic time. But there was a certain sense of global connection that happened during the pandemic. And I think that also led to this incredible global support for the Black Lives Matter movement, where we saw people taking to the streets, completely sort of ethnically diverse groups all over the world, who are calling for an end to racial inequality, and were calling for racial justice. And that was an incredible thing to see. I think after that height of the Black Lives Matter movement and the end of the pandemic, we saw a lot of calls for change, and institutions looking at themselves, thinking, how can I do better? Even people waking up and thinking about racism for the first time. I had a lot of people coming to me going, oh, racism is a terrible thing. And I'm thinking, you're 40 years old. It's the first time you've actually thought about that. So people, obviously not people of color, but people, so some of my white friends, and sort of say, oh, what could I read my children, which is, which represents Black and brown characters? And I thought, well, great, you're asking me, but I've been doing this work for 25 years. You could have asked me before. Weren't you listening? So there was this sort of mass realization and this desire for change. So that has led to another paradigm shift, which is positive. And a lot of institutions have taken a good, hard, long look at themselves, and they have had reviews, and they've had consultants come in, and they've changed the way they do things, and they've understood more about what structural racism looks like. However, there's also been a lot of box ticking exercises. So there's a bit of, we did that, we had that review, and now everything's fine. We dealt with it. So for me, racial justice looks like a dedication to long-term change. And if we're talking about it from an institutional perspective, that means money invested in it. It means continuing to talk to the right people, and that's not just sort of very highly educated consultants, but people with lived experience. It's an ongoing process with no end, really, and not many institutions are committed to doing that. But that's where we are. If institutions are willing to put that time and money and investment and listening in, then we start to see something closer to racial justice. But just to add, I've also been working. I'm training to be a mountain leader, and I've been working with a lot of Black hiking groups, and I'm a hike leader for Black Girls Hike. And I had some really interesting conversations with these different Black hiking groups across the country. And what really heartens me is seeing quite a lot of young Black people who are really invested in abolition. So the abolition in terms of abolition of systems of inequality, whether that's prison and policing systems, sexual violence against women, racial violence. So there's a kind of reaching for a utopia and a utopian way of being, which I haven't heard young people talk about since I was teaching 15 years ago. And so that gives me hope for the future, that young Black people are thinking about completely new ways of restructuring our lives, where we can actually live outside of these systems of oppression rather than accepting them as a part of our everyday world. So that relationship with nature, I think, is absolutely key to healing. And so I conducted a series of interviews with hiking group leaders for people of colour, and also participants in walking groups focused on people of colour. And it is such a transformative experience for people. So when I went to Scotland to speak to the Black Scottish adventurers, there's 100 people, mainly of African descent, turn up in a car park at 8 o'clock in the morning and head off to the hills. And there were women there who had not been on hikes before, who had come over. A young woman from Kenya who was 20. She said she never really walked. She didn't walk back home because it wasn't considered safe, although she was in a very natural environment. And when she came back down from that hike, she said, "I feel like my life has changed." And not only that, but to be also amongst other Black people, to walk in a majority, you are the majority. And I've noticed when I've been leading Black Girls Hikes, if we see other Black women, and we don't often see other Black women walking in the hills, but they'll come over and say, "Wow, it's so good to see you all. Like, what are you all doing? And can I?" And then when they find out we're doing a hike, and there's this whole thing called Black Girls Hike, then they end up joining us and joining the WhatsApp. So there's a real appetite for it. But there are so many barriers to access. The countryside is still very much white, male-dominated, middle class. The number of Black people that access national parks is still very low. And I think that one of the things that we really need to work on is to making people feel that this belongs to all of us. It's free and it's out there. And that needs, again, for those outdoor institutions to not just feature Black people on the covers of their magazines and on their they have different sort of mountain festivals. They'll invite a few Black people to those mountain festivals as representatives and put them all over the covers of all their brochures, but they're still not a proper representation. So again, it's got to be a consistent, dedicated pledge, really, for proper change. The outdoors is an incredibly healing space. That's what, in my poetry book, Bath of Herbs, that's what I write about. So I write about cold water swimming, I write about climbing mountains, I write about the healing power of nature. And through that, I do explore my connections to the plantations in the Caribbean, how I was treated as a child growing up in North Wales with a Black mother and being mixed heritage and also being light-skinned. So all of these I kind of work out, but against that backdrop of nature. And I actually write my poems while I'm walking a lot. So I'll do voice notes, and it's being in that environment. And just finally, what I'd like to do is to set up walking groups for Black and brown women, and to have those mountain walks, but also to come back down and reflect on them in poetry and prose, because nature writing is again a really white dominated patriarchal space. So I'd like to try and do my bit to make a change in terms of access to the natural landscape for Black and brown women, but also to do that kind of intervention into the very male dominated white nature writing tradition, looking at the natural world, from that Black and brown female perspective, which is a very different one to what we have here. This poem is from a book called Oluwale Now, and this is edited by Cy Murray, who's another poet based in Leeds, and myself. And the book comes from a competition that we ran, and we were asking for contemporary responses to the David Oluwale story. And we were just inundated with all sorts of beautiful poetry entries, prose entries, and also artwork. So it's published by People Tree Press, who are Leeds-based publishers of Caribbean and Black British work. And it has all sorts of photographs in it, as well as beautiful poems and short stories. And people looked at what the David Oluwale story, but looked at how it connected to the present day. And it has Hibiscus Rising on the cover, which is the sculpture that's been created in Leeds by Yinka Shonibari to commemorate David. So the poem I want to read is called Oluwale Rising. And I wrote it while I was looking at the Hibiscus Rising sculpture. And I wanted to try and imagine what it would be like for David Oluwale, who was a man forgotten and a man failed by Leeds, to come back and to see what people are doing to remember him and to make sure that things that happen to him don't happen again. And I thought that that realization that we are now many decades later empathizing with him in this way, was very powerful. So the first line as well of the poem comes from the blue plaque that the Oluwale Society put up to commemorate David. And it's a line by Karrell Phillips on the blue plaque, which is on Leeds Bridge. And Karrell Phillips wrote, "The river tried to carry you away, but you remain with us in Leeds." Oluwale Rising. The river tried to carry me away, but you stem that pull today. See how this flower has grown, bursting out of concrete to remember me here and carry me home. You rememoried me in strokes of pens and brushes, in lyrics of lament. Every thought you had for me was a petal scattered on the waters, every plea of peace for me, a blessing on the breeze. People of Leeds, in your dreams you seeded me and grew me a hibiscus, Ankara swirling, blossoming from stone, blooming from pain, forever reaching for the sun, gifting me the knowing that you hear my breath in yours and we can rise as one.